So, have you recently found out about aphantasia or that you have low visualization and want to get started training, but you're not sure where to start? Like, what do you practice? What do you look for? How do you know if you're doing it right? My name is Alec, and I've been working for over 7 years to help people either jumpstart or improve their mental imagery. And thankfully, my students have gotten all sorts of breakthroughs, like take Harry, for example, who said the progress has been significant. I have moved from complete aphantasia to hypophantasia. So pretty cool. So for this video, I want to break down the main through lines that I've noticed over the past 7 years that help people in their starting process while they're just starting out training mental imagery. Now, this video is going to be a little bit different paced. It's going to be a little longer than the ones I've been putting out recently. I really want to dig into these topics here and have it just be a stream, a flow of information that can be useful for you in your starting out journey. Now, I want to mention, just as we're getting started here, that these are like the recommendations that I sat down, I really thought this out. I wanted to put together my main recommendations. If you're just starting out, you just found out about this, you just started to explore the idea of training mental imagery, where do you start? What are the main things that you need to keep in mind? And what are some of the things that I've recognized again and again and again? I want to share those things with you. Hopefully that allows you to fast track your journey so that it doesn't have to be a 7-year process, like I've been having with my clients, but you can start seeing some different things within maybe a month or a few weeks or something. Okay, so first, to kick us off, I want to share about this one time, this will segue into our first point. I remember this time where I was working with somebody and we were 4 sessions in. So back then I used to do like an hour-long intro call that was complimentary, and then they hired me for 4 sessions, right, to see how far we could get. We were on session 3. We were at the end of session 3. So we were 4 hours just about into our process together, right? I had tried as best I could to understand where she was at. It sounded like she had aphantasia. While we were working in this session, there was a moment where she said, "Oh, well, hang on a second. See it in my mind. Well, I can do that." I remember I was trying to have her do like a mental scene or remember a part of her day or something like that, where she was thinking of herself walking back through it. She goes, "I can do that." And I'm like, "Okay, how vivid is it?" And she's like, "Oh, it's like I'm there. It's like a 10 out of 10. Right? And we dug in a little bit more. Come to find out, she wasn't experiencing aphantasia. She was experiencing lack of what we call projected imagery, lack of prophantasia. Like when she closed her eyes, it was just black, but her mind's eye was completely intact and was very functional, hyperfunctional. She would be better classified as a hyperphantasic. So that was really an eye-opener for me at that point, and I think for her too. As we went forward, I remember the next session, we actually trained prophantasia after that, and she got some success in both areas. Not only did she realize that her mind's eye was active, but she also got some projected imagery as well. So here's my first point. In the very first place you want to start is get clear on where you are at, right? What type of imagery you have or don't have, and then set your goals. So mind's eye versus projected imagery is super, super, super important. Most visualizers, I've said this again and again on my channel, feel free to watch some of the other videos, but most visualizers do not see anything physically when they close their eyes, and I can't stress that enough. It's a sense of visuals that occur in the mind. Okay, so mind's eye versus projected imagery is very important. Projected imagery would be you close your eyes, and you do actually see something. There is something, I would say, like holographic or visual in front of you, right? That you can it feels like you can physically see it. Dreams are a great example of this because it feels like you're seeing something. So get clear, first of all, on the difference between those two types of visualization as best you can. It's subjective, so it's kind of tricky. My favorite litmus test is for mind's eye activity. If you're thinking in just words or processing the information and there's no sense of roundness to a ball, there's no sense of the shade of color behind the thought of that color or the color of that ball, then it may be lacking visual thought. You'd have to dig in quite deep to try to do that. Again, my other videos, I think I explain that a lot more in depth. So just because you close your eyes doesn't necessarily mean you have aphantasia, right? So you really got to dig in with yourself here, and almost, don't let yourself off the hook. Really explore the how behind how you're thinking, the how to your thoughts, as opposed to the what, right? Not, I am remembering, how are you remembering? I can think of the ball, that's not quite good enough. How are you thinking of the ball? That's where you want to really dig in with yourself and ask and explore. Once you're a little clearer on what type of imagery you're experiencing or maybe experiencing, okay, it's clear that I lack mental, the projected imagery when I close my eyes, but I do get a slight sense here and there, and you can kind of pinpoint where you're at on the spectrum, from aphantasia, hypophantasia, common fantasia to hyper. Well, now, then, and only then, can you set goals, right? Can you go, okay, well, I lack projected imagery. Now I really want to develop my projected imagery. I do have access to some mind's eye, whatever it may be, whatever your situation may be. But getting clear is essential to knowing what goal you want to hit. Because, here's the thing. These things are so subjective that if you're unclear as to whether or not your mind's eye is actually active, well, it's going to be near impossible to set a target to hit, right? It would be like trying to have an archer hit a target, blindfolding them, spinning around in a circle and go, well, good luck. We don't know where the target is, so how are you supposed to aim your muscles to be able to hit that target? It's going to be kind of impossible. And then online, if you're unclear on those things, online you'll find a bunch of different types of exercises and types of recommendations and types of reports of different types of imagery that people are experimenting with, and it's just going to be too much. So that would be absolutely where I say start, is figure out where you're at on the spectrum as best you can, and then from there set a goal in terms of what you want to develop, what type of imagery you want to develop. So the next point I want to dig into is being extremely aware of what I would call defeated thoughts, or our internal narratives around what we think is possible and things like that. I want to tell you a story. When I first started back in 2018, the very first person I worked with was my cousin. And at the time, she had, described aphantasia to me back in 2011. I couldn't find any research on it or anything at that time, so we just thought it was weird. And actually, that same year, I did try to develop some exercises for my roommate who also experienced aphantasia. I found out that fall. But those exercises didn't work, and we'll kind of get to the bottom of why here. Anyways, so I worked with my cousin. This was a great experience. She would, the place where she started was quite obviously aphantasia. So in her mind, she was not able to produce any mental images, any conscious mental images whatsoever. And even her dreams, she would describe as like blindfolded. So she would wake up having a list of recall of what had happened in the dream. Like, I was standing here, I was at a party, somebody handed me a drink, whatever. But no actual sense of the space, no sense of the visual of the space or the colors of the place or what people were wearing. It was like she described it as if she was blindfolded during a dream and would just wake up with a list of things that had happened. So we worked together for 7 sessions, and I remember her very first breakthrough was the sense of a color of a sunset. So not the horizon, not the shape of the sun or something like that. It was just the color itself, just that kind of sunset red, deep sunset red color. Then her second breakthrough was a moment when she was thinking about her morning routine, and she was like unwrapping a Pop-Tart in her recall, in her recollection. And she was able to get a flash of the Pop-Tart itself, kind of the reflection bouncing off of it, and even a little bit of the background of the kitchen. So pretty cool. By the end of the 7 sessions, she was able to think of herself sitting on a beach and perceiving the waves rolling in, and the sand in front of her and the horizon. It was pretty vague still, but it was there. It was a huge difference compared to where we started. So pretty cool to start from aphantasia and to get all the way to those types of experiences. Now, flash forward to 3 months later, and we're sitting together with the family at family vacation, and my jaw hits the floor because she's telling everybody, yeah, I just can't visualize. I never have, and I never will. And I'm like, oh, hey, what about all the breakthrough that you had gotten on our sessions? you were able to experience some new things. What about all of that? And she looked me dead in the eye and said, I don't remember that. That didn't happen. And I was like, it sure did happen. Well, tell you what, let's sit down tomorrow night and do like a catch-up session, and I'll go over, we'll go over some stuff together. So the next night we sat down and I pulled open my notes. Thankfully, I took some, being the first person, I had the cognizance of mind to take some notes. And each breakthrough moment that I would read to her would jump back into her recollection. She'd go, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, the Pop-Tart, the beach. Oh yeah. And lo and behold, guess what happened after the memory of the breakthroughs came back to her conscious mind? It also reinitiated the ability itself. She got back access to the mind's eye right then and there, and she had the most vivid visualization that she had up until that point. Pretty wild, and it took me a couple weeks to really dissect and understand this event and what happened. And what I realized back then was I didn't make an emphasis at all in those initial sessions to adjust the pattern of thought, to adjust the internal narrative of how we process, or how we, our framing of what our experience is. For instance, if somebody has the internal narrative that's very, very strong, and that's been your experience of I can't visualize, well, in order to make progress in visualization, we need to address that. So we need to be really intentional with addressing our internal narratives, our internal things that we tell ourselves about visualization, about whether or not we can do something, right? Especially in this area because it's subjective, because the only one that's going to be able to tell if you did make progress or not is you, since it's experienced purely in your mind, right? So we need to be intentional with tackling limited thinking, tackling the limited thoughts around this topic. I call this defeated thinking, right? So anything like defeated thinking, you can consider anything that's said or felt that aligns us with the outcome that we don't want, right? So if we're trying to learn mental imagery, learn how to have mental images, and we're saying to ourselves internally, I can't visualize, removing that word from our vocabulary, can't, is going to be very important. And sometimes it comes out even more subtly than what I'm describing here. Like somebody asks a student of mine or something, hey, how are the sessions going with Alec? And they're like, yeah, they're fun, but I can't visualize, So what they're doing unintentionally is reinforcing the outcome of not being able to visualize by their language and by the subconscious programming that they're still running internally. We all have it. Especially around learning new skills and stuff, all of us are going to come up to a measure of that at any point, even physical skills like an instrument or a sport or something like that. These sorts of thoughts can also be just a feeling, like not words, like just an emotion or like a heaviness around the thing that we're trying to develop. Those ones are a little more subtle to kind of pick up on and start tweaking, but it's very important to be aware of those things when they do kick in. So once you are aware of your internal narrative that's backing up your undesired outcome that you won't be able to visualize, right? Well, what do? What I suggest people do is that they don't push it away. They don't shove that feeling or that thought down. What you want to do is you recognize it, you notice it, and then you adjust, right? So, okay, I can't visualize. It runs through your mind. It's kind of an automatic process, especially if you haven't visualized in the 50 years you've been alive or whatever, right? So you notice that thought. You don't try to push it away, because just like a crying child, it'll become louder. It needs something from you, right? It needs some attention. So you notice it, and then you subtly adjust that emotion, or you subtly write down, maybe even write down the thing that you'd rather replace that thought with. You'll find over time that if you're diligent with that narrative will start to shift. That narrative will start to be more malleable, and you'll be able to mold it in a direction that you actually want. The other thing I would say that's really effective for tackling limited thinking in this area is proving to yourself via other people's reports that making progress is even possible, right? So in social groups that I've run, we've had like breakthrough categories where people can share their breakthroughs. Lots of cool stuff in there. People in my programs, my case study videos, that I ran back in 2020, that demonstrates that people are actually making progress and to a pretty significant rate. People online on the Cure Aphantasia subreddit, lots of people have been experiencing progress. So filling up your bank and helping yourself to believe that it even is possible based on other people doing it, it goes a long way. What it brings to mind is the 4-minute mile. Back when the 4-minute mile wasn't a thing yet, when a runner couldn't run the 4-minute mile yet, a lot of people in the sports industry and even the medical community was saying that a 4-minute mile is impossible. Like, look, you're going to pass over dead. You're going to kill over dead if you run a 4-minute mile. The human heart just can't take it, right? But there was one guy named Roger Bannister. I forget what year this happened in, but Roger Bannister, he got so close to the 4-minute mile that at one point there was a switch in his mind about it. And he thought to himself, well, if I can get that close, I think I could shave off another 10 seconds. I should be able to do this. And then one magical day, sure enough, he did. He broke the 4-minute mile. It was a huge day in sports. Well, guess what happened after Roger broke that 4-minute mile limitation? Other people started breaking it. And now there's a handful, I think there's like 20 or 30 people now throughout history who have been able to break the 4-minute mile. And it was considered impossible. So what we want to do for ourselves is that similar process. Understand that it is possible. The brain is very plastic, right? Neuroplasticity is a huge field. We understand a lot more about the brain than we did a long time ago. So it is plastic, and it does seem possible for most people to make at least a little bit amount of progress, So when you do that for yourself, then the subconscious door can open, and it's not closed. It's not can't anymore. It's not totally closed off from your experience. Now, at least there's a little bit of a crack in the door where you can go, okay, well, this might be possible. And that's usually enough, I find, at least for my students, to start making progress, start seeing some different things in their cognition. And one last thing I want to mention here is this idea of, like, let's say somebody wants to go take piano lessons, but they have an internal narrative that they absolutely have no musical talent and they will not be able to play piano. They can't play piano, right? Not due to any disability. They just honestly believe that they won't be able to learn. Well, there won't be much point to the lessons because every time the teacher will try to get them to put their hands on the keys, well, the person's just going to chime back, I don't think you understand. I can't play piano, right? Well, there's a process there. There's a process of hitting one key after the other and learning the muscle movement, right? Muscle memory. And that's where these abilities with mind's eye and stuff are a lot more tricky than something like learning an instrument, but they are very similar, I find. It's trickier because it's not a physical skill. It's harder to measure. It's harder to convince yourself that you can do it when you're not able to do it yet. But it's the same in that it does seem to be something that can be built slowly over time, like learning an instrument. Okay, so next let's go back to that previous student that I mentioned where we had worked together 3 hours, 4 hours until realizing that they were probably a hyperphantasic. The tricky thing with that situation is that, we had been practicing a certain thing for 3 sessions, right? I was directing all the exercises towards developing mind's eye as opposed to developing prophantasia. And at the end of that, well, now we finally realized where she actually was, and now she could start to develop prophantasia because she already had a mind's eye. It was like we were working towards something and doing exercises towards something that she already had. So that wasn't really going to get any actual progress in the thing she was actually looking for, right? So that brings us to our next point, which is sports. I call it sports-specific exercises. If you're trying to learn how to shoot free throws, there's no sense at going to a tennis court, right, and using a tennis racket. It's not going to help with free throws, right? If you want big biceps, you're not going to go to the gym and get on the leg press and train your legs, right? So just like that, the mind's eye versus projected imagery, these two types of mental imagery, they have specific exercises. One would not necessarily be beneficial for the other. Now, I find some people reporting that actually training projected imagery does help to increase the mind's eye over time. I haven't found that to be the case yet in my program. The way that I do it with people is we get the mind's eye up to whatever degree that they're hoping for. If they're starting from aphantasia, maybe they want to get to hypo or common. They'll stick with that until they actually get close to that. And then we'll move into projected imagery. That's just how I've naturally flown. But I have found actually, even with my students, that training the mind's eye sometimes does produce projected imagery as a byproduct. And so it would be reasonable to assume that it would be vice versa as well, that training projected imagery may help increase the mind's eye activity as well. So not quite sure yet. I've seen it this way, I just haven't seen it that way yet. So here's the thing about these two types of imagery. Mind's eye exercises, I'll give you kind of an overview of what to practice when you're doing mind's eye exercise, mind's eye specific exercises. That's describing things with words that you're seeing or thinking of, remembering, whatever, right? So I find that that's one of the biggest keys, describing the visual attributes of the things that you see or the things that you remember. Now, with projected imagery, this can be trained in a bunch of different ways. Some of it's a little like funky and esoteric, at least the way that I train it, the way that I teach people how to do projected imagery. But one of the easiest ways to start training projected imagery is play with after images. So you look at an image, you take it away. I have videos on this on my channel. And then what's left in your field of view after the image leaves your field of view is an after image. So you can actually learn how to sustain those. You can intentionally try to change them or alter them. And then I would also say what I call a felt sense of an object, because essentially prophantasia it's a trippy thing. It's, in essence, you're trying to convince your brain that you're seeing something that isn't there. You're trying to learn how to intentionally hallucinate something. So the more that you can convince your mind that something is there, if it's not, well, that'll really, really help with prophantasia. So maybe you can't see a triangle yet, but can you feel it? Can you feel it out in front of you? Start there. And then I'll say this, that breakthroughs in these areas should actually come relatively quickly. Like in my program, it usually takes about 2 to 3 sessions before somebody starts recognizing some different style of cognition, which is actually pretty wild if you think about it. You would assume that something like this might take months. It really doesn't. Most people I've only worked with for like 6 sessions, total. And that was 1 per week. So like 6 weeks. And usually by session 2, 3, 4, that's when they start having different types of experiences kick in. So it should really happen pretty quick. That being said, if you're not getting any results on the thing that you're practicing, it's a good idea to kind of step back, to try something different, to maybe take a break, leave it alone for a couple days, and then come back to it. And then outside of that, I would always say, run with what's fun. Like just play on the stuff that you're excited about. Try not to get too bogged down with it's not happening, blah, blah, blah. Just explore and kind of release any pressure that you have on yourself. Okay, so the next point I want to talk about is this idea of metacognition. This happens all the time where I'll have a session with a student, let's say week 2 or something, week 3, and they have some cool stuff starting to pop to mind, right? Some new types of things are kicking in. It looks like we're going to be starting to make some progress. And then the following week, we jump back on a session and it seems like they didn't have any observations of any of the same stuff that we had accessed the session prior. Or anything to report, right? I'll ask them, how did the week go? How did your assignments go? How was the practice? What did you notice? And I'm not even necessarily looking for only visual stuff. And sometimes people will report, well, I wasn't aware of anything. Nothing happened in my mind, which is tricky to use for coaching, right? Because that leaves me in a position of like, well, what do I do with that? So we got to really dig in those cases to find out, well, what could have happened in the mind, what maybe did happen that was so subtle that you wrote off, right? And this leads us to the idea of exercising metacognition. So first of all, what is metacognition? I'd like to define it for you. Metacognition is the awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. So how are you thinking? So this is where you're trying to understand and put to words how you're thinking and not just that you're thinking or not what you're thinking about. So for instance, if somebody just says, I remember what that dog looked like. Well, the fact that you're remembering is not what we're after. The fact of you remembering is not going to get you very far if that's where that conversation point stops. What you want to do is ask yourself, how am I remembering? How am I remembering that dog? What exactly is the process that my mind is going through to bring that dog to mind? And that is the process of metacognition in a nutshell, right? So the uncomfortable reality to this, unfortunately, is if somebody does not have very adept metacognition, or maybe they're just not used to doing it yet, well, even if they started to make progress in their mind's eye and they started to have some new things kick in, they won't really consciously be able to catch those things or recognize those things. And I've seen that again and again as well. So let's say somebody, has a mind-blowing they start from aphantasia, they have a mind-blowing visualization experience. If the metacognition isn't quite there, they will only be able to report that nothing happened, that nothing was there, right? So exercising metacognition, digging into your thoughts and understanding how you're thinking and really putting words to it and identify those processes in your mind is very, 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 very important. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is this idea that we will forget progress. It's kind of inevitable, but there are ways that you can mitigate this. So I can't tell you how many times this has happened when I've been working with clients that I'll ask them, hey, how was the week? How did the homework go? And they have nothing to report, which isn't super abnormal. And I go, okay, well, dig in a little bit, still nothing. Okay, nothing visual happened that's new. Okay, good to know. And then I'll be teaching or something in the next segment. I break up my sessions into certain segments. I'll be teaching about something and it jogs their memory and something comes back to mind and they go, oh my gosh, I just remembered the mind-blowing, life-changing visualization I just had 2 nights ago. And it's like, oh man, how did they not remember that a second ago? I find that if you don't write stuff down and commit it to memory, it's going to be really hard to hang on to. So our next point is to keep a journal. Keep a journal. I promise you this is such a huge part of this process of developing mental imagery. And it pretty much kicks in every time. If somebody reports nothing happening and then it comes back to memory, usually they didn't write it down. So one of the main parts of my job as a coach is to remind people to write stuff down throughout the week because things are so subtle too. And not only that, but it's like our narrative. So here's the tricky thing about this idea, that since our narrative of our default experience is so powerful in our mind, that narrative will actually erase the things we do notice throughout the week if we're trying to practice these things. It's a subjective skill, so if your narrative kicks back in that you can't visualize, well, even if you had a visualization back on Tuesday, it's going to be gone unless you write it down, right? It's trippy. Not only can it make you forget breakthroughs like that, but like I said with my cousin earlier, it can also seem to turn off the ability of visualization altogether, which is wild. All right, so now to recap what we went over in this video for a couple quick bullet points so you can take home with you. First, get clear on where you're at on the spectrum. Are you starting from aphantasia? Are you starting from hypophantasia, common phantasia, hyper? Where are you at on that side of the spectrum? Then figure out, okay, well, are you also lacking in projected imagery, or how much projected imagery do you have? If you're lacking in both, great. Now you know, and you can set your goals accordingly. So that's number one. Number two, tackle that defeated thinking, our default narratives. And I want to say this about this point. It's understandable. You've lived your whole life with one mode of thought, typically, right? So it's understandable that we have those ways and those default narratives that come in that say we can't do something. But just like learning a physical skill, the better way to think about it is I'm not able to do it yet, but I will, or I'm working on it. Then at least you can start to crack that subconscious door open a tiny bit. Next, practice the correct thing, right? Certain types of exercises will be better for certain types of imagery. So if you're trying to train mind's eye imagery, don't train with after images. If you're trying to train projected imagery, don't waste your time with mind's eye imagery. I have a mega guide on my website with all of the exercises that I do with people. And they're broken down into those categories. So feel free to jump on there and get some ideas for some exercises. Next, practice metacognition, right? Analyze the thought process that you're having, not what you're thinking of, but how you're thinking of the thing that you're thinking of or remembering. And finally, keep a journal. Write stuff down. If you do not write something down when you notice it, even if it's not visual, write it down. But if you don't write it down, that thing will likely be lost, and your mind will not even recollect that it ever happened in the first place. And the final thing I'll say, I'll kind of throw this in as a bonus, is don't give up. Don't give up. And this is really an overflow of the way that I prefer to live my life, is that I won't give up if I want something, right? I either get the thing or I'm going to die trying. So the only way that I figure somebody absolutely won't make any progress is if they end up giving up. And the more that you stick with something, the more likely it's going to happen. So don't take no for an answer in this sense of developing a skill that you truly desire in your life. Keep that focus and go for it. Okay, so I hope you found that information valuable. And again, these are the main concepts over the 7 years I've been doing this with people that I find are the most important in getting the journey started for yourself. So if you want an ebook that's totally free resource for you with visual aids and things like that, free ebook is in the description in the link. So go ahead, click that link. You can get that in there. And other than that, that wraps it up for today. I will see you next time.